on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, they had the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. This is how we meet the disciples again. When we left each other yesterday, Jesus was still on the cross. At that point, he was taken down, he was buried, and these disciples who had decided that Jesus was their man, he was the one, he was the hope, he was the fulfillment. They just saw that hope, that fulfillment get thoroughly beaten. They had become just another nodule in the long line of people who had tried to push back against the system and been beaten. They had lost. They looked at it. They looked at this situation and they were, this is not what we had imagined. At this point, there is no Christianity. There is no Christ as far as they can see. But this is where Christianity is a little bit of a different story to the other religious stories around the world, because where other stories begin with the leader alive, teaching, conquering, this story begins once the leader is dead. Because into the darkness of that room, suddenly the disciples realize we're not alone. They sense a presence in the room. And then more suddenly, a voice comes from behind them. Peace be with you. And the Christian record of this is that they turn around and the man who had been beaten, defeated, executed, stood among them in the flesh. He showed them his hands, he showed them his feet, the wounds, so that they realized they weren't just imagining, he was there in the flesh. This is what Christians call resurrection. The resurrection of Christ from the dead, bodily raised again. And this is why on Easter Sunday, when you get there, the candle is lit, because the hope that seemed to have died comes to life again. And when you look back through the candles, you've got the despair, you've got the weight of the Lenten purple, the spring of hope in the pink, and then the intensity of the red of the blood of the passion. That's where a lot of stories end. But the Christian story does not end there. When we meet those disciples again, they look like anyone else who's just experienced the crushing blow of death, of finality. If you've ever been to a funeral, you've felt it. You've felt that weight. When Jesus walks back into that room, he holds out the hope that death is not the end. That death is not the end. And in fact, the afterlife has broken into the present. And that is the hope that Christians hold to then. It's the hope that Christians hold to now. Paul says it. He says it's so important. He tells the Corinthians in this letter, he's like, if Christ hasn't been raised, this whole thing is a G-up. This whole thing is a hoax. Because there's no hope if Christ hasn't been raised. The resurrection was God's approval stamp that what Jesus did on the cross was enough, that it was victorious, that what looked like this crushing defeat was in fact the most wonderful victory. And it turns the world on its head. It turns the world on its head, that God himself, who was supposed to be this mighty, sort of domineering figure in the cultures around the world at that time, had in fact come and been broken and had suffered and yet had crushed the things that held humanity captive: sin, death. And the resurrection is the stamp that that is true. So Calvin, as you head into Easter this weekend, hold to the hope of the resurrection, that there is life to come, and that life to come has broken into the now. As Jesus said, he came to bring life and life to the full. I pray that you know it this week and this weekend.